Hi, everybody. What I want to talk about today is a very common thing that I see in the enablement world. And it goes like this. So you're a CRO and you hire your enablement person to build the function, to start it off when you're nice and small as a company. And they were the perfect hire. They got in there. And then over the past couple of years, the company grew from this big to this big to this big. And you start to realize that the needs of the enablement function in that person is different now than it was a couple of years ago. Everything's more complex. Your business model has shifted and matured. You've built up your go-to-market team, and all of a sudden, the needs of that enablement leader, it's a little bit different. And that person was probably perfect for 2 years ago, 3 years ago, but now you're not so sure. And what do you do? And this is a common thing I see a lot for fast growing companies. And I want to dive deep on this because what I see is a lot of revenue leaders end up getting this wrong, or they sort of make some impetuous decisions about how to handle this. And so we're going to go deep on that today. So for this topic, I brought in a friend of mine who I've known for quite a long time to dive deep on this topic. So maybe Reena, introduce yourself and a little bit about your background.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks, Dave. Reena runs Sapphire Go to Market. We focus on enablement consulting. So we do contract work, project-based work, you name it. But one of the things that I'm really passionate about is a topic that we're going to talk about today, which is enablement coaching and helping people get to the next level in their enablement org.
Perfect. So fact check me on what I said before. So the scenario I described of my person for here, it maybe not right for the person for this size company. What are you seeing like that in your world?
So that's exactly the scenario that I see, right? That somebody is hired maybe at an enablement manager level, and to be honest, they crush it when they first start. They fill in the gaps where they need to. They because they've come from internally, usually within the org, they're able to be scrappy. They know the org well. They can do whatever you need them to do. And then there's kind of like this inflection point where you realize you have to either hire a ton of reps or maybe you're doing something complicated like going to another geo or another vertical, and you realize that you have to be a little bit more intentional or strategic about what you're doing. So, what I see most often is that people don't necessarily know if they have the right or wrong fit. They're just unsure and they want to shore it up by hiring externally sometimes or hiring on top. But I think there's an opportunity to kind of step back. And before you do that, you might want to do that still. Just kind of understand like what great enablement looks like and see if the talent you have within your org can really fill it.
Yeah, I want to make that part very clear. What most revenue leaders, their reflexive response is to fire the person. Like, I love them, I hate for them to leave, but they're just not right for what I need now. And they let them go. Or what they also see sometimes is, like you said, they will just sort of hire on top of them. Then all of a sudden you have a really expensive person on top of a person who is pretty good, and all of a sudden you're hiring more, you have more than you need in terms of enablement staffing. And so that's, I think those are the things I oftentimes see them do. And again, your point of view is that maybe isn't the right call. And I know over lunch we're talking about a recent project of yours, which is what spurred this conversation today. But maybe tell me about that project because I think it leads into what we're talking about today.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, that's what I see. But the project that I'm working on right now, or the coaching that I'm doing, was very talented enablement hire internally. She started off as I think an SDR manager, kind of rose through the ranks, and then became enablement. So pretty strong on the sales skills side, and then learning kind of the enablement piece. They got a huge round of funding over the summer in 2025. And then they did realize they were going to hire hundreds of reps for 2026. They kind of started to have their plan. They were expanding into APAC, EMEA, you name it, like kind of the usual SaaS expansion. And she was very good at her job. She is very good at her job. But they were kind of wondering, what does enablement 2.0 look like? Like, what does it look to get it to the next level? And are we kind of staffed to do that? And so they took a step back and they started trying to figure out what does great look like and started to dig in and say, like, Do we need different talent? Do we need to up level our talent? What should we actually do to plug in the gap? And to their credit, I don't think a lot of orgs do this, but they realize that if they don't get better at enablement, it could be a huge risk for them. So that's kind of, and then they ended up calling. They were very problem aware. They knew that they needed to level up enablement, but they didn't necessarily know how. And so we talked about a few different things. Like I could have provided advisory hours to the team in general. I could have done project-based work with them, but we ended up landing on coaching because he acknowledged that his enablement person was really good. She probably could get to the next level. So we worked together, and that's the package that we came up with because he wanted to see if she was a person that could get it done or kind of if they really did need to hire externally, which I thought was a really smart move on his part.
And just coaching takes on a lot of forms. So just be clear, like what kinds of coaching are we talking about here? Because again, I think it could be interpreted a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I would say it's a mix of like coaching and then framing, like almost like working together to build their programming. But what we landed on was 7 or 8 sessions over the course of a quarter with me and their enablement person, 1 hour sessions where we really dug in deep to a lot of topics. She wanted to focus on enablement impact and KPIs. So that was something that we spent a lot of time on. We also talked about how to build a good program, what mature enablement looks like at every function. So those are really the three things that we focused on a lot. The way we got there was we kind of did like a assessment gap on her, and she was like, "Hey, here are the things that I'm really good at." So I mentioned before she was an internal hire, so like cross-functional work, she killed it. She was really good at it.
Sure.
But making sure that she talked like impact to the stakeholders, she wanted to work on herself. So those are kind of the areas that we touched on.
And you were saying she was gap aware herself. She knew where her shortcomings were.
Yeah, which so I got to talk to her luckily during the sales process. So it made it feel more of a partnership
Mm.
versus like, hey, somebody's coming in and telling you what to do. She was very open with me. She really loved her job. She knew she was hitting a wall a little bit and she couldn't figure out where. So I think she was receptive and happy to have some help. But she knew she was like, I feel like I build really good programs, but sometimes they don't stick. Or sometimes I feel like the managers don't know the impact because I'm not communicating it well enough. So she came in pretty aware of where her blind spots were.
Interesting. That's fortunate because I'm sure it's not always that way. Um, but let's go to the other side of that coin. So, how did you and the revenue leader work on this together? Like, what was that level of collaboration? What were his or her marching orders? Like, talk me through that side of the fence.
Yeah, actually, this was something that was interesting to me even. So I was working with the VP of sales. That's who the enablement manager reported to, which was great. He came to me and bound, they had like almost like a laundry list of things that they wanted to work on. I think one of them I mentioned before was what should enablement look like at a Series D company of their size? What should the enablement person be responsible for? And then they had some onboarding needs, et cetera, et cetera. So he came in very problem aware, which not everybody is. He was not solution aware though, because as you
Mm.
can imagine, when you have like that many things on your plate, it's hard to know where to start solving it. And we talked about, hey, should I do project-based work for you? Like the field was ours, essentially, him and mine to solve. And so we got to this conclusion of coaching or working with their internal team because they had such a good foundation already. They were working on the right things like onboarding and product launches and getting things ready for the EMEA launch. They were doing all that stuff. They really just needed to get it to the next level. And he himself said, I don't even know what great enablement looks like at our stage, right? He admitted that. So he was like, I would love for you to kind of teach her, show her, like, hey, what does sophisticated change management look like? What does sophisticated manager engagement look like? So that's kind of how we landed on coaching instead of all the other things we could have worked on together. And to his credit, he wasn't really looking for like immediate ROI.
Mm.
He kind of viewed it as reduction and an investment in his team. And his goal was, I want to keep the train moving, whether or not we hire somebody else, right? So that takes, I think, a lot of wherewithal to get to that point. So then we put some talking points together for him to work on with his CFO. And that's kind of how the sales process went.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's funny. In my opinion or my hypothesis is that the ROI is simple in that you don't have to you putting beside the business ROI. The simple ROI of if I have to hire a person here, that person's more expensive than the person I have. And so a couple incremental dollars of coaching services on top of the person you have here to get them upskilled, that seems like a very easy ROI that any CFO would understand and every revenue leader, would be happy with. That's how I view it. Is that how you think about it?
That's how I think about it. And unless they're working with you, Dave, an enablement hire could be kind of risky in some ways, right? If they hire the wrong person or whatever it is. So it is a low risk way to make sure that things are going in the right direction, especially because if you are reporting to the VP of sales, they don't have time sometimes to teach the person. But sometimes the reality is also the VP of sales hasn't done it at that scale too, a lot of the times. So that's just the interesting thing to realize is that if your expertise isn't in-house, how do you shore that up in a cost-effective way?
Yeah, and just to go back to our initial premise, this all assumes that they like the person in terms of they're doing a good job as well as they can, and they would love to keep them if only they had a couple more skills. Like that's if
Yeah.
if they're doing a terrible job out of the gate, that's not what we're talking about here today. But this is really when they're just not quite all the way there. And so that sounds interesting. I'm curious, is it too early to know kind of what happened, the kind of the results of the time together, or do we know yet?
We know some of it actually. She's been very honest with me, which has been great. She definitely has a lot more clarity. I know this is a hard thing, but she's empowered to say no a little
Mm,
bit more just because she was serving. To give you context, I think they had 100 reps and two enablement people, one that served AEs and one that served SDRs. So she feels like because she has more, I would say, strategic projects on her plate when cross-functional people come to her, she's like, "Hey, this is what I have to give up in
mm.
order to put this on the agenda." I'm not saying no, I'm just giving transparency. So that's the first thing. And I think she feels herself that she has a better hold on the metrics. Part of what we did when we worked together is I would say, "Hey, like these are what we should track for this project." And I would tell her to go work with sales ops or go work with that team to build the dashboard so she could build that muscle herself of saying like, hey, this is visually not easy enough to follow if I'm in a meeting, or this is exactly what I need. So I think she started being more comfortable having those conversations and reaching out to ops and partnering with them in that
Yeah.
way, which it sounds like she hadn't done in the past. And I think overall they feel like they're headed in the right direction as an enablement org. And it just gave them more options. They didn't have to rush to hire. They didn't have to like build, they didn't have to go through this. I think what they were worried about was going through hiring and standing up a team and all of that. They could kind of slow roll it a little bit and take their time, which I think was a benefit for them.
Yeah, yeah, I think typically if that person has smarts and the drive to learn and the curiosity, like if they have that, then with a little bit they can go pretty far. When they don't have those things, that's a different story. But I think when you have a smart person who's eager to learn and then you get them some really good coaching, that takes them pretty far down the field, I typically find.
Yeah, I'm curious, like when you're talking to these VP of sales CROs, like how often they proactively ever bring this up as an option? Do they see it themselves?
No, they don't. It's something I typically will end up introducing, because they're like, let me have the debate of like, do I layer this person? Do I fire this person? Like those are the two options. It looks very, very binary to them at that point. And oftentimes we'll talk about, well, how well are they doing? How hungry are they? Are they getting it? Does the organization like this person? Like, is there something there to work on? Is it a project worth investing in? And so
Mhm.
I'll introduce this third option, like exactly what you did there, of can we upskill your person enough to make them the right person? Because again, you don't want to hire a VP, you don't want to hire a person this high. That's overkill sometimes. And so this person upskilling them a bit is usually like the right level. And so sometimes it's oh, is that an option? Kind of conversation when I'm talking to them.
Yeah, I can imagine because I haven't. This is something that I think there's a huge need for in the market just because it's been difficult sometimes. You know this, I know this. I think people listening might know this, but getting people to hire sometimes at a director or VP level for their first hire is a difficult conversation, or it doesn't make sense mathematically for them to do it.
Yes.
This is kind of one route for them to take. It's like, hey, hire at the level that you think, but then hire coaching to help make sure those first 60, 90 days, that investment goes the way you want it to go. That's another way of thinking about it too.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Because I mentioned this scenario of we hired this person when we were this big, now we're this big. So it's like a scaling thing. But I think separate from that, there's also just a skill gap, just a regular old skill gap of like maybe we haven't grown that fast, but he or she really struggles with the metrics or partnering with a field or ad nauseum. There's so many things you can choose, but those skills, if it's things that are you can isolate, they're like, if only we could fix these two things, and if they're coachable, I think that's when the scenario makes a lot of sense. And so, there's just a lot of things. And I guess, the reason I wanted to have this discussion with you is to flesh it out, but also to encourage a lot of these revenue leaders to have an open mind and don't, it's not always like a hiring issue or a firing issue. Sometimes it's a coaching issue. And I think it's the right uh, thing to consider. It's not always the right answer. As you said early on, like we have to have our options and think about whether this is the right thing. But this is how you find out. This is how you figure out like if we get them coaching, are we seeing a difference? Are they learning? Are they changing? Are they saying no, like you said in your example? Are they getting better with the metrics? But this is a very safe way to find out rather than having to start a hiring process.
Yeah, it's actually funny that you frame it like that because I think that it's sometimes the obvious answers with sales reps, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
you have somebody that's maybe almost hitting quota but not quite there. You would naturally, a lot of people invest in coaches or managers start coaching a little bit more. That option historically hasn't existed for enablement, so maybe that's why it's just not something that's top of mind for people, but you wouldn't let go of a rep that's almost there. You
Yeah.
would you would try to help them.
And I'll just argue, you and I knowing enablement as we do, that these roles, especially the leaders, they have a long tail, meaning, to swap out people, that impacts systems and kind of procedures and like your tech stack, everything is sort of in place. And then swapping out a person can oftentimes change all of that. And so it's a very big consequential decision when those changes are made. And so, to your point, sometimes the third option is the right thing. Got to be considering it. Okay, so I want to just kind of distill this down for some folks listening. So, you knowing all the conversation you've had, what's the biggest piece of advice you would give to the hiring managers out there?
Ooh, hiring managers for sales enablement?
Yeah, who no, the people who are what's your advice for the CROs who are faced with this situation of trying to decide, do I fire this person? Do I layer them? Like, what do I do? How would you advise them in this scenario?
So I think you actually touched on it earlier pretty well. The route I went down was, hey, does this person actually have potential to stay? Is this a retention play? Do you want to keep this person? One thing that was painfully obvious in the sales cycle for me was they didn't want to lose this person to another organization, right? And if that's how you feel, that's a good signal that coaching might be the right answer for you. So that's one thing to look for. The other thing to look for, and I was going to riff off of what you said a little bit, but enablement professionals typically have like long tenures. So you have to think about that. They're not usually people that go from role to role to role. So an investment does pay off even if you don't see it immediately. So if you know that enablement is critical to your success in the next 6 months or a year, whatever it is, spending the money now is going to be worth it on the back end, kind of no matter what you do. So it's something to consider that you would invest in systems, you would invest in the other roles in your organization. So my advice is, even if it's not coaching for enablement, how can you level up your enablement org and make sure they're staying on top of things? So those are the two pieces. Like, hey, do they have a gap in one or two of them that you think could be fulfilled and you want to keep them? And then even if it's not through coaching, how are you actually helping your enablement team get upskilled? Because funny enough, they're the most hungry. They love teaching. So how do you make sure that they're getting what they need to?
I think that's great advice. And I think, you're pointing out how there are some similarities to what you do with a sales rep who maybe is almost there. And I think, even if you think about a sales cycle, with reps, you train them, you teach them all this stuff, and then, they don't close enterprise deals a month later. Those things
Yeah.
take time, right? Like they have to learn the skill, find their sea legs, and these things take time. But you look for early indications that the rep is getting it, right? Are they changing how they do their deals or discovery? Like you're seeing early indications of like, all right, they're picking it up. I think the same thing holds here that, you start to look at them. And so you have a little bit of coaching and you have to be a little bit patient because to your point, enablement takes some time to fully mature and build the programs. And like, it just takes some time. And so you have to have some patience. But like, I think here also, there are some degree of like, are you seeing these early indications on the enablement person that they're
Mhm.
starting to improve with the coaching, with the way we're thinking about it now? And if you're not seeing improvement, that's one thing. But if you're starting to see early signs, it tells you you're on the right track. And so a little patience, let it continue to percolate and become, its greatness is probably not a terrible thing.
Yeah, I'll share a quick story. I met what I thought was and she is a rock star enablement professional probably 5 years ago, when she had just moved from an AE role into sales enablement. Probably a year into her enablement tenure, she invested in sales enablement coaching. And I talked to her about it. I was like, recently, I was like, what was your experience? How did you enjoy it? What worked and what didn't? And she is now on another company, almost a director level enablement person, getting great marks, amazing work, good impact. She said coaching was one of the things that I credit my success to. She
Wow.
said, it is one of the things that I hold near and dear to my heart because it made such an impact. It was hard to kind of show at the time, but I still use everything that I learned in those sessions. And that kind of stood out to me as this does work. It's just a long game a little bit.
Interesting. Something just popped in my head. I'm going to ask you now. So just let's do a what if scenario. So the project you've been working on, we were talking about earlier. So what if you were in there and all of a sudden, like things aren't, you don't think it's working? Like what would be your signs that you would see that you would turn to the CRO and say, we tried, she's not going to make it, or he's not going to make it? Like what would those indicators look like to you?
So one of the things that I'm really big on in the coaching sessions is actually giving like homework or assignments and making sure that one basic thing that you have to do as a professional is follow through. Like those, there are small signals, tactical signals that you can look for, like, hey, are they on time? Did they complete? Are they responsive when I email them, right? But then there are things where I actually get them to present to me sometimes
Oh,
and say like, hey, what are you planning on saying in this meeting to capture your sales manager's attention? What are you going to say if you get this kind of pushback? And if over the sessions I'm not seeing improvement in quality of answers or kind of presence or the way that they come to the table, that's a signal for me to let the CRO or VP of sales know because for just the way that I've set it up is every session they get a recap. So if I feel like kind of the back half of the sessions that I'm not seeing improvement, I will start to flag that because they should know like, hey, maybe you actually do need to layer on top, and that's the move right now. But kind of just keeping that feedback loop open and looking for small tactical things, but also if you say you're going to work on something, like let's work on it together live,
Yeah.
because there's no better time to practice. So,
Yeah, if they're not hungry and they're not picking up on stuff, like there's only so much you can do. And so sometimes we all have to be honest that sometimes it does make sense to pull the ripcord and make a change. And I have some older videos for revenue leaders about when to make a change with your enablement leader. But I think today was really all about like when they're almost there, what can you do to make it work? And so you've been an oasis of information. Thank you for sharing the story of the projects you've been working on, and also just your expertise as one who's been in the space for a while. I think you have lots of knowledge to drop, and I appreciate you sharing that with everybody out there today.